So as we're waiting for a couple of more people to join us, can a few of you unmute your mics and let me know what you'd like to get out of today's webinar and how much experience you have using Transana? That helps me kind of pitch the webinar to the audience that I have on a given day. So would somebody be willing to unmute and say a little bit about what you're hoping to get out of the webinar and how much experience you have with Transana?
Hi, my name's Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
All right. I actually have been using Transana and for transcribing, but the next step I need is to be able to get those video clips and export them. And I thought I was doing it, but I only clipped the transcript part, and I don't know how to do the video part. I've tried that. It's just not working for me, but it's not because of the program. It's because of me.
Okay. If you want to stay at the end of the webinar for a couple of minutes, we can focus specifically on where you're running into difficulty. So if you just want to hang out for a couple of minutes.
That sounds great. And then I know there's some new bells and whistles. I want to know about those. I guess that's what this seminar is about, right?
Right. Okay. Anybody else want to chime in before we get started?
Hi, David.
Hello.
It's Marion Bond. Hello. We met many years ago when Transana was just being developed. I think we met in Southampton University or something a long time ago. And I haven't used it recently. We use Boris. I don't know if you know Boris.
I don't know Boris.
No, well, Boris is another mechanism which is, I think it's a free system, which all our students at the university that I am an academic at, they use Boris. But I know Transana is much more complex and much more useful. So I'm really trying to catch up with from Transana 1, I think, up to Transana 5. So I'm just anything and everything that I can hear today will be useful.
Okay, yeah, Transana's come a long way since version 1. I'm betting that we met probably at Durham.
Yes, I can't quite remember, but I think I think you were doing a couple of days Transana information, and I know it was on the south coast of England, so it was somewhere down the Southampton area.
Okay.
And I think that was all those years ago. I offered to help write a booklet on Transana, and that never actually came into being with me. But anyway, it'll be really useful to hear anything and everything today.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is David Woods. I am the developer and publisher of Transana, and so I'm going to do a quick introduction to the program. I'm trying to cram as much as I can into the next hour. Unfortunately, it's a topic that I could talk about for days if given the opportunity. So it's needs to be a little bit rushed to get in everything I want to. And so I'm going to do a quick overview of the program. Please interrupt with questions as we go along. The webinar doesn't flow quite as smoothly when people do that, but I think it gets people answers to questions when they're most urgent. And I think that it ends up being better for questions coming up. So I'm happy to have people unmute their mics and ask questions as we go. There's also a chat associated with Zoom that you can use to ask your questions. All right, I am showing version Transana 5.01 Professional. It is the new version. Came out just a couple of weeks ago. Transana 5 with a couple of very exciting new features, and I will touch upon those as we go. Transana is designed for qualitative analysis. It supports working with plain text data, PDF data, audio and video data, still image data, survey data. If you've done open-ended questions in an online survey, Transana has some special tools for that, and it can do a lot with a lot of different kinds of data. What I'm going to touch upon is I'm going to talk briefly about how one brings data into Transana. Then we'll talk about how one assigns analytic meaning to the data that one has brought in. We'll talk about once you've assigned that analytic meaning, how do you make sense of it in a theoretical way? How do you kind of take that next step from having a whole bunch of interesting pieces of data to developing a theory? And then I will happily take questions for as long as there are questions at the end of the webinar as well. So I'm going to focus primarily on video and audio data. I think that video and audio data is one of the ways that Transana is different than most other qualitative packages. I think Transana treats audio and video data in ways that it needs to be treated, and that not all packages quite do as well at. But roughly the same process works with other kinds of data as well. And as I say, I'll touch upon those as we go. So let me introduce Transana's basic windows. I'm going to go ahead and open some data.
This is the core they started with, and they want it to look like that. I'm going to first flip it up. Watch what happens.
So this is what Transana looks like when you're in the middle of analyzing video data. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, there's a media window that shows your the video or allows you to control your audio. You can play and pause. You can scroll through it. You can take video screen grabs and incorporate those into your analysis as a way of bringing the visual element into analysis. And so that's the media window in the upper right-hand corner. In the lower left-hand corner is the document window. If you have text-only data, you work with that in the document window. If you have a transcript associated with your media data, which in this case we do, you see that in the document window as well. You may have noticed when the video was playing that there was a highlight in the transcript that moved along with the video. And that transcript serves a number of purposes. It's important to recognize that when you're working in Transana analyzing media data, the media data is your primary data. Nothing bugs me more than when I'm doing lit reviews and I read articles and they say we did interviews that we recorded and we created transcripts and we threw away our media and we analyzed the transcript. Well, if you're throwing away your media file, you're throwing away a lot of the richness of the data that you've collected. Working with media is distinctly different than working with transcripts of that media, because the media is so much richer and there's additional information that you can gather from that, from expression, intonation, facial expression, body posture, all kinds of information that is readily interpretable and that allows you to be more accurate in your analyses. So the transcript really serves two purposes when working with media data. First off, sometimes there are bits of your media data that are difficult to understand. And if you take the time during transcription to listen repeatedly and tease those out, then you can have a written version of that data that allows you to spell things out clearly and be able to understand it every time you go back to it, so you don't have to refigure it out each time when there's overlapping speech or elements that are maybe not quite as clearly caught on the audio as you'd like, those kinds of things. But the other thing is that the transcript serves as a map to your data. So I know, for example, in this particular video, this is a classroom video, it's actually a mathematics lesson, and I know they discuss the concept of symmetry. And if that's what I want to work on today, I can type in part of the word symmetry and search my transcript, and that allows me to jump immediately.
And Amanda, while she was listening to the story, said, "What's symmetrical?"
That allows me to find the spot in my media data that I'm looking for and want to work with, or that I'm quoting for an article or whatever. But the transcript provides you a way of finding the bit of video in your data that you're looking for, because that's not necessarily an easy thing to do.
And
when you're just scanning through the visuals and looking at the video, it's very difficult to find what you're looking for. whereas it's much, much easier in the transcript. Transcripts are optional, though. There are research situations where it is much more efficient to work without a transcript, and you can code video directly without a transcript in Transana if that's what your particular research situation calls for. Above the document window, we have the visualization window. This provides a couple of different ways of visualizing the data. Again, really aimed at helping you navigate through and find what you're looking at. There's a waveform diagram when you have media data that shows a visual representation of the audio track so that you can see, here's a spot where there's a much more concentrated conversation. You can actually see breaks in the conversation, and you can actually, if you zoom in on this, be able to identify individual words, and that can be really helpful, particularly during the transcription process. And you'll see below that the keyword visualization, which actually gives us a map of the coding that I've done to this particular video. You can see as I move my mouse over these bars, the screen tells me what all of my codes are. And so that gives me some indication of the coding that I've done on this particular video as well, both to show me what parts of the data I've analyzed or not analyzed yet, but also to give me a preliminary look at, for example, what keywords tend to go together and the relationship between the different kinds of coding and what sorts of codes are coming up most frequently in my work, all of that fun stuff. Then in the lower right-hand corner, we have the data window. The data window is where one interacts with one's data in Transana. So when you're bringing new data in, you start that process in the data window. When you're selecting what you're going to work on today, you select that through the data window. When you want to trigger a report, you use the data window to specify what report you want and what data you want to include in that report. And so the data window is primarily for interacting with your data in an analytic way. You also initiate searches through that. You define your coding system through that, all kinds of stuff. And that will become evident as we go. Just really quickly, I've shown you video. There are, of course, other kinds of data. I'm going to open a PDF. And so this is a PDF that I've pulled into Transana and coded. You can see that the coding shapes show you what codes I've applied to this PDF and show you what areas of the PDF I've focused on for that particular coding. With PDFs, Transana takes a very visual approach to the coding so that you can code text selections, as I've done in these two instances, where Transana extracts the text from the PDF, makes it available to all of Transana's different tools, so that you can do text searches and have parts of the PDF called up, things like that. But Transana also allows you to do graphical coding of graphical elements of a PDF and treat the PDF as a visual medium as well, if that is what your particular analysis calls for. And PDFs, because they differ from other kinds of data, come in their own PDF window that allows you to work with them in a way that is a little bit different than working with plain text data that's not part of the PDF. And so PDFs are a new feature in the Transana 5 release. So if you have PDF data, definitely spend a little bit of time checking that out. Okay, so to bring, does anybody have any questions, just given that very quick overview, or are we ready to move on to bringing data in? As I say, if you have a question, go ahead and unmute your microphone and ask your question, or type it into the chat, and I'll be happy to answer it that way. Within Transana's data window, you see that we start with 4 elements. Libraries are for raw data. You put all of your data into libraries in Transana. Libraries are simply ways of organizing the data. The assumption is that some people using Transana will have very large data sets. I'm just finishing up a project right now. We have 1,700 videos that we've analyzed, and libraries have been really, really helpful in organizing that much data so that it's easy to find the bit of data that you're looking for at any given time. Collections are for analytic data. Bits of the larger data set that you have identified as analytically interesting get identified in collections as being interesting bits, and there are a number of different ways that you can manipulate them to assign meaning to them analytically and to make sense out of that bit of data. Keywords are where you define your coding system, and so you can define sets of codes in groups to apply to your data if coding is the way that you want to approach your data. And then search gets you into Transana's search interface that allows you to do complex searches about keywords, about text content in the data, about categorization that you've done during your analysis, and combinations of all of those to be able to explore your data and achieve additional insights using Transana's search tools. To bring data in, we start with a library. Now I have some sample data here that allows me to particularly, I have a variety of data here that allows me to address questions as they come up. But when you start, you won't have any libraries. So the first thing you do is to create a library, which is very interesting, very easy to do. You go to this libraries node in the data tree, right click that to get the menu. We're going to choose add library. I'm just going to call it my webinar demo library. And so I've now created a library. I now have a place to put the data that I'm bringing in for my webinar demonstration. I'm going to bring in a piece of video data. Video data is a slightly more complex data type than text data is, or than PDFs are. And so if you know how to bring video into Transana, then you know how to bring other types in as well, because it's just a simpler case of the same activities. So I'm going to right click my library, and you see I have a variety of options. I can bring in text or PDF. I can bring in, I can create an episode, which is bringing in media-based data. I can import spreadsheet data, which is, as I mentioned earlier, if you've done an online survey, you get your data from that survey tool in a spreadsheet format. You can import that into Transana. Transana will do some initial organizational work on that data to get it ready for analysis. And there are a variety of other options that we'll touch upon later. If I want to bring in video data, I'm going to choose add episode. And I'm now going to go out there and browse to my demo directory and select my demonstration file as the data I want to bring in. And so I have identified the data. Now I'm going to do a little bit of preliminary coding on this. This particular lesson is a math lesson. So I'm going to my math concepts keyword group, and I'm going to select geometry. This is a geometry lesson, and I want that code to be suggested as a default code for all of the elements that I create from this particular video. So I can define default coding, codes that are suggested every time you do you create an analytic selection from a particular piece of media. So that's a nice way of handling, demographic data or participant data or the general sort of factual, non-theoretical kinds of information that one does like to keep track of about one's data. So I've assigned that default code. Transana is now asking me to create a transcript, and I will do that. And I'm going to choose an automated transcription method. Transana 5 offers automated transcription, which gives you at least a good first draft transcript for your media files in many cases. Can you only have one default code is a question in the chat. No, you can have as many default codes as you want or need. I just picked one because that was the one that I thought applied most to this, but you can have multiple default codes if you would like to. So I've selected the automated transcription method of using the Speechmatic server. What that means is that I'm connecting up with a server from a company called speechmatics.com. You have to make sure that your IRB has approved you sending your data to the server for automated transcription. That's a very important piece of business to have taken care of. I have signed up with Speechmatics. I have an account on their server. They give about 4 hours of automated transcription a month for free, and you can pay for additional automated transcription beyond that if that's not adequate to meet your needs. So yeah, you set up an account with Speechmatics and you follow their rules about payment. Essentially, Transana is just providing a conduit. I don't make any money out of the work that people do with Speechmatics, but it makes the process of analysis easier. And so I'm providing that through Transana. So I'm going to select the automated transcription, and Transana is now going to run me through my automated transcription tool. I'm going to acknowledge that, yes, I do have permission to share this data with their server. It's all automated. Nobody ever actually looks at your data, but it's still one of those things you need to have IRB permission and all that. Is there a time limit on videos that Speechmatics handles? Not that I'm aware of. As far as I know, you can do very long videos with Speechmatics. I haven't done anything over about 45 minutes myself, but I'm not aware of any limitations on that. Transana has extracted the audio from my video because it just submits audio to Speechmatics. Speechmatics doesn't need any of the visuals. It creates a smaller file to transfer. It provides at least a little bit of theoretical protection for your subjects in that you're sending voice but not picture for them. Not that anybody's ever looking at it, but still. So Transana does the audio extraction automatically. Here's where you specify. Speechmatics supports 48 different languages. It's a very impressive list. And so you identify the language that your data is in. Mine is in English. For English, you get to choose Australian, British, or US English as the sort of idioma to use on top of the language. There are a couple of different variations of Chinese as well. As far as I know, English and Chinese are the only two languages where this additional setting is available. You can specify standard or enhanced in terms of accuracy. Enhanced is a little bit more accurate, but it's also slower and may cost more. I'm not exactly sure of the details. And then I've specified what's called my Speechmatics API key, which is basically that's my account name. You get that from the Speechmatics website when you sign up and you enter that into Transana. It's like a password. It's a thing that that would cost you money if somebody else used it. So it's de-identified in Transana's interface. And I now submit that. And Transana is now sending that audio file it created to the Speechmatics server. The Speechmatics server is processing that audio file and creating a text version of that, which it is sending back to my computer. And Transana is then interpreting that data file it gets back from Speechmatics and making it more Transana specific, doing things like inserting time codes. For those of you familiar with how Transana's transcription works, you insert time codes to link the transcript to the media file, and Transana is also color coding that Speechmatics gives an indication of its level of confidence in its ability to identify what has been said. And so you can see that when you first get your data back from Speechmatics, anything in black is 90% or higher confidence. Anything is blue is 80 to 90% confident. Green is 70 to 80% confident, and red is below 70%. And those are really just guidelines. I have found elements that are in black text that are completely incorrect. I found elements that are in red text that are absolutely correct. And so that's an indication of where you might direct your attention in your first pass through the transcript. of where their computer was less confident or more confident in its ability to decipher what was in the audio. And so my next step is generally to go through the transcript and listen to it and polish it up, clean things up. Just for example, here in the first sentence, it's unsure whether the word is really core there, and so I'll play my audio.
This is the core they started with, and they want it to look like that.
And that is indeed correct, so I'll identify that. There's a button here that in the formatting toolbar that allows me to change color text to black, and that is specifically added to serve the function of when you're double checking your transcript. It allows you to quickly format the text the way you want it to be. So here's my next one.
It's this.
So that again is accurate.
Stand up or lifting.
Okay, in this case, it's not get up, it's flipping it up. So I correct that. I know this isn't very exciting to watch, but my point is that with the automated transcription, you do need to take the time to double check it, to run through it. It is, however, considerably faster to go through and correct a transcript you've gotten from Speechmatics than it is to create the transcript manually. Although Transana does provide a lot of tools for manual transcription that make that process better than other options. Okay, a couple of more questions in the chat. Most automated transcription software can't accurately transcribe data that consists of code switching or multiple language use. For example, Spanglish. Speechmatics probably has similar difficulties with code switching. I am unfortunately a monolingual English speaker, and so I have not been able to test that myself. The translators, the people who translate Transana into the languages that it supports, those who have tested Speechmatics say it does a reasonably good job in their languages. Where you get into mixed languages, Spanglish, for example, I'm guessing that nobody does Spanglish well because that is a small enough niche that nobody's really focused on getting that correct. I've talked with the developers at Speechmatics, and they say that their system does make some efforts when multiple languages are used in the same video. Their transcription engine makes an effort to identify languages within a video and get them correct. And they say that it's good, but I have not been able to test that myself. So I don't really know the answers, but again, my philosophy of all of this is Speechmatics gives you a rough draft that you're going to have to go in and correct. If you have a lot of excuse me, if you have a lot of overlapping speech, if you have a lot of Spanglish, if you have background noise that makes it difficult to distinguish what people are saying, you're going to have to correct those manually. Speechmatics is as good as any of the systems that I've experimented with, but bottom line is that speech to text is still an evolving art form. It's much better than it was a year ago. It will be much better a year from now. Next question. When importing a video, it sounds like Speechmatics is a seamless process. Transana connects with their system, but you have to have an account. Yes, you do have to have a Speechmatics account. What is the cost? They have a system where the more you process with them, the more they bill you. So it's a per minute charge in essence. And that's all available at speechmatics.com on their website. So you'll have to explore that for yourself. Sorry, we are serving as fosters for a cat right now who loves to walk on my keyboard. So I'm experiencing cat-related difficulties at the moment. Okay. Let's see. Another question, so many services are English only. I'm glad that there's one that is multilingual despite the challenges. Yeah, one of the reasons that I chose Speechmatics as the first service to implement was their support for so many different languages. Ultimately, Transana is a very international program. At least 50% of my sales are outside of the US, and Transana gets used in many, many, many languages. And so their support for so many languages was one of the reasons that I chose them. My first criteria was quality of the transcription, but languages was a close second. So I encourage you to explore those capabilities. And if you, I'd actually appreciate it if you could send me a quick email and let me know what your experiences are, so that I can better answer questions like this that come up in future webinars. Okay, another question on, did I say that Speechmatic allows transcription of 4 hours per month? If you have a free account with Speechmatics, you get 4 hours per month for free. You can do more than that in the month. You just have to pay for anything beyond those 4 hours. I have heard that it works well in Italian as well. Okay, so we now have a video that has been imported into Transana. We have created an automated transcript that goes with it. We're just going to, I'm actually going to go ahead and load my transcript of this that I've already gone through and corrected, rather than working with the Speechmatics one that I haven't had a chance to correct. And so I now have my transcript, and you will see these red marks throughout the transcript. Those marks are time codes. If I push this button, Transana actually will display the time value for each of those red marks. Each of those red marks links a position in the transcript with a position in the media file. And that's how Transana maintains the linkage, so that when I click down here, you'll see that Transana automatically highlights the text between two time codes, between the two closest time codes to where I made my selection. And if I now right click this, Transana will play this segment from this time code in front to the time code behind. Time codes are the magic that make the linkage between the transcript and the media file work so well. Okay, how are we doing on time? Running behind. So that is bringing data in. Let's move on now to, once you've got your data in Transana, what do you do with it? This is the part that I'm sometimes a little bit challenged to explain clearly at the speed of a webinar. Transana offers two parallel systems for analyzing data. There's coding and there's categorization. And the two systems serve the same function. They allow you to identify what is analytically interesting about your data, but they work in slightly different ways to meet slightly different analytic needs. So I have my data here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection in my data. And we're going to assume that this selection is analytically really, really important for my analysis. Now, I didn't actually bother to read it. I don't have that kind of time when I'm doing the webinar, but I've identified a selection in my data that is really important. And so I'm going to go to my keywords. And so this is where the teacher is doing a demonstration. So I'm going to go to my teaching techniques keyword group, and I have a keyword there for demonstration. So I'm going to just double click that keyword. I have now applied the keyword or the code demonstration to this selection in my media file. And you'll notice up in the visualization window, there are now two bars here. You can see one of those is geometry. which was the default code that I had applied to this video. And the other one is demonstration, which is the code that I just added. So Transana has taken this selection I've made as bounded by those two time codes, and it is applied the keyword demonstration that I just selected to identify that. And let's say that this is also, we'll say that this is an example of model. It's not, but that's neither here nor there. I can double click that and I can apply the additional keyword to this particular selection. So I now have 3 codes applied to that particular selection. I can go on, I can work more with my data. I can find another section that is analytically tremendously significant. Let's pick this one. And this is an example of let's see, I always get in trouble when I try and think. We're going to call it giving instructions. So I've double clicked giving instructions. That has applied that code to this selection. And again, up in the keyword visualization, we see that the code giving instructions is now matched to this particular selection. So I can go through my video. I can identify what is interesting. I can code it up as much as I want. And it's a very quick process. You identify, you use the transcript to identify what you want to code, and you double click the codes in the keywords node in the data window to identify what keywords you apply to those selections. So that's the process of coding. And you can see in the visualization that we start to get a sense of what that coding looks like. So that's one approach to data with Transana, one that people are probably readily familiar with from their experience evaluating qualitative data, is that process of coding, that process of developing an analytic tag that identifies what is important or interesting and applying that to a selection in your data. But Transana offers an alternate approach to data called categorization. With categorization, you create a collection. Collection is simply a place to hold data. And you can use that to perform your analysis. So I was doing an analysis of an advertising campaign, and I wanted to look at the argumentation that they were using in this advertising campaign to influence people to basically give up money in exchange for goods. And so I got a bunch of ads together from an ad campaign, and I started evaluating. The first thing that I did was I got a bunch of selections and I put them in the argumentation category. I then looked at the first 15 or 20 selections that I had made, and I determined that there were 2 different things going on. There was certainly logical argumentation. You should buy our product because it solves a particular problem, it provides a particular function, it meets a particular need. Arguments designed to appeal to your brain so that you would make the logical decision to purchase their particular product. But there was another thing going on that I thought was interesting. You know, all of the cool kids use our product. You can take our product to the beach. You know, it's really pretty and flashy and great looking. And those were arguments that were not really designed to appeal to your brain. You know, the product was not really one where the look of the product was particularly important to its functionality. And so I called that emotional argumentation. So I created collections within my argumentation collection, and I sorted the clips that I had created into those that were logical arguments and those that were emotional arguments. And I did some more data, and I looked at those groups, and I determined that there were a number of different approaches to emotional argumentation that were going on. There were a number of different logical arguments being made. So I created nested collections and I sorted my data into those. And what you can see is that what you end up with is a nested set of collections where the collections represent theoretical constructs and the clips that you have made go into those collections as evidence of that particular part of the theory. And so you can actually approach your data that way. And you can see quite readily that there's a lot more emotional argumentation going on than there is logical argumentation going on. And if you really dig into the logical argumentation, you actually find out that some of the logical arguments that they make are simply factually incorrect. And so it was very interesting to get that sense of how this advertising campaign worked, the kinds of things that they were doing to influence people's purchasing decisions. And I was able to do all of that through the process of categorization without any coding involved. And the reason that Transana has two different systems is because we support lots of different qualitative methodologies. Different methodologies have different needs. You implement different methodologies in slightly different ways. And so some methodologies work a little bit better under coding, some methodologies work a little bit better under categorization. Some methodologies you can do either way. So that's one part of it. A second part of it is I worked with lots and lots of researchers over the 25 years that I've been working on Transana. And I found that no two researchers think quite the same way when they think about how they approach their data. And there are different styles. Some researchers really prefer the sort of visual approach of categorization where you can see what your categories are and you can see how much data is in them, and you name all of your data items so that you can look at this and tell what's there in a way that doesn't quite work for coding. Others are much more comfortable with the slightly more abstract coding approach, where you can work up a bunch of data and then ask yourself the question, all right, math concept of pi, what in my data is related to the math concept of pi? I've just all right, something's going on there. My quick search isn't working. That's strange. But I can go to the keyword, I can do a search, I can find out what's coded, I can bring things together that way. And so it's a slightly different approach. And so Transana supports that. And what I've found over the years is that I actually use different parts of these tools at different times in the analytic process. Early on, when I don't really know where my data is taking me, I do a lot more coding. Once I have a sense of what is emerging, what my theory is, what I'm going to say about the data, as that develops, I switch to a more categorization approach. And by the time I'm ready to write my article, what I have is a neat set of categories that lay out all of the arguments I'm going to make in my paper, with all of the quotes that I'm going to write in as examples of those different categories stored under each of those categories. So I actually shift from a coding approach to a categorization approach as my understanding of where the data is taking me, what I have to say about it changes. And so it's one of those things, if you play with it for a little while, you'll come to understand it. It's really very intuitive when you work with it. It's just a little bit hard to explain up front. Okay, I see that there are a bunch of new questions in the chat. Let me address those. So Debbie says, I got Transana Professional. Do I need to update Transana Professional to use Speechmatics? You need to have Transana 5.0, currently 5.01 actually, to be able to use Speechmatics. It's not available in Transana 4. It's one of the major features of the new release. If your purchase is less than a year old, you can upgrade for free. If your purchase is more than 1 year old, but less than 3 years old, you're eligible for a discounted upgrade, which you can get through the Transana website, going to the downloads and upgrades section and typing in your email address. If it's over 3 years old, then you need a fresh Transana purchase. Your current data and transcription will continue to be accessible when you upgrade Transana. Transana does not mess with your data. It upgrades your data as it needs to for to support the new features, But no, Transana is not going to wipe your data out and make you start over again just because you need new features. Upgrading is a relatively seamless process. Regarding collections, when you highlight the text, the collection does not play the video part of the transcript, right? A collection does not play video. A clip plays video. So if I have a collection with clips in it, if I select the clip,
I want something that works. I want something that works.
that plays my video. The collection itself, I have the option of play all clips, which will play any clips in that collection one at a time, so that you can see if they hang together as a coherent concept. But the collection itself doesn't play clips, because that's not a collection, just holds things. It doesn't do things. And can Transana do automated coding? If a particular word appears many times across multiple texts. Transana does not do automated coding. I have not found a model that has enough intelligence for that kind of automated coding to be worth the time it takes to evaluate. So Transana does expect you to do your coding manually because ultimately a human brain is required in that process. You can do a text search and locate all instances of a particular word as a way of getting to those sections that you want to consider for coding more efficiently, but Transana will not do the coding for you. The exception to that is if you're bringing in data from an online survey, Transana does do some base coding for you based on features of the survey. So if you asked people, their gender or their age group, you can apply that as codes to the data as it's brought into Transana, as Transana organizes it by participant and by questionnaire question. Transana does a bunch of processing and organizing when it brings that data in, and it does do a little bit of automated coding in that one instance, but I have not found a way of doing coding that was worth the time that it took to evaluate beyond that. Okay. So I've done a search for the math concept of pi. So back to what I was talking about before, you can do a search on your keywords and Transana will identify the data that fits the terms of that search. And you can see here, I've done a search on the math concept of pi. This is video of third graders in the US. And so here is a set of clips that actually tells a little story about what this set of third graders understands about the concept of pi. So it tells a little bit of a story, a narrative story from my analysis of that math data. And so that's one approaches data that has been coded a little bit differently than one approaches data that has been categorized, and there are different tools available to make sense out of all of that data. So we've talked a little bit about how we code and categorize data. It's basically that process of identifying a selection in your data that's analytically meaningful and either applying a code to it or placing that selection in a category that you can then manipulate later as a part of an example. Let's take a moment to talk about still images. Transana allows you to analyze still image data as well as other types of data. The way Transana approaches still images is it allows you to draw coding shapes. You create a combination of shape, color, line style, and line width to identify different codes, and you can literally draw those codes onto an image as a way of drawing the researcher's attention to particular features of a still image that you want to code in a particular way. So here is a statue that I saw in the British Museum when I was in London one time. I thought it was really interesting that this statue ended up having 5 legs. So I coded up those 5 legs as 3 legs being represented once. Those are under the legs that are okay code in green. And then that right front leg is represented twice. You can see it from, depending upon your angle of looking at the statue. Sometimes you just see one, sometimes you just see the other. I happen to shoot this photograph where you could see both. And so I've indicated that that's legs duplicate. You'll notice that these particular coding shapes are fairly detailed. Transana gives you a variety of tools. You can draw rectangles, ellipses, lines, arrows, or the more detailed polygon shapes, depending on your analytic need and how quickly you want to move. And so you can draw all of those codes on. That's how Transana approaches the coding of still images and the graphical coding of PDFs as well. Question comes in, can I do that visual coding on video? There isn't a way of drawing on a video, just the underlying computer technology. When a computer is presenting video, it has a need to manipulate the screen in unusual ways, involving changing portions of the screen very, very quickly. And it doesn't give you a way of drawing on top of that. The video player takes over that portion of the screen, and anything that you draw on it gets wiped out immediately. There's no way of forcing drawing on top of the video. The video gets the top layer, if you will, in the screen. So what you do instead is, I have an example of that somewhere. No, it's not this one. What you can do is you can take a screen capture from the video, draw on that to do your coding, and drop that into the transcript. I know how I'll find that example. Oh, okay. I'm not going to be able to find that example, but you can actually.
You mean so if you did a line down here? You mean so if you did a line down?
So if I've got my transcript here, I can actually, I'm going to create a snapshot. I'm going to do that snapshot as part of a video capture. I can, in whatever way I need to, code it up, and I can then let's show my coding key, and I can drop that bit of coded video into my transcript to give it the particular context so that you can actually create a still image as a screenshot from your video, drop that into the transcript to give it context, and that's how you take the visual aspects of your video and bring it into your analysis. It is not as elegant as being able to draw that kind of coding on the screen, but I've just never been able, from a technical standpoint, to figure out how to program that. because the underlying tools don't allow it in any way that I've been able to figure out. Okay, so that is still images. All right, let's talk now about making sense out of coding. So you've brought your data in, you've coded it up, you've categorized it, you've made all kinds of analytic observations and decisions and brought it all together. And Transana provides a variety of tools for working with that data. So I, for example, have US presidential debates where I focus just on the questions asked by moderators. And I actually have that for 3 election cycles. And the question I wanted to answer was, do the moderators behave differently in different election cycles? And so one of the ways that I can do that is I can use Transana's word frequency report to look at the language that was contained in the questions asked by moderators across those 3 different election cycles. So this gives me a list of all of the words contained in those questions. You can see that I've taken a little bit of time to do word grouping, to take different forms of words and group them together so that they get counted together and represented together. And you can create a word cloud that gives you a very quick visual understanding of that. And if we look at that for a couple of different election cycles, we can actually get a very interesting sense of what the language was that was used in these different cycles. And if we really take the time to figure it all out, we can see that in 2008, the questions were very policy oriented, whereas in 2016, they were very much oriented on personality. So the questions were completely different in these 2 election cycles for a whole variety of reasons that I don't really want to go into, and you probably don't want to hear anyway. But you can use the word frequency report and the word cloud to do an exploration of the language that is used by your participants in your analytic artifacts that you have created over time. Now, that was the word frequency report about the questions that I had gathered together in a collection, so my analytic bits, but I can also go to the individual debates and look at that on a whole debate process. So this is the same report, the word frequency report, but in this case, what it's looking at is the full text of a particular debate instead of the selections that I had made across the whole series of debates. And this gives me a look at what words were used in this particular debate and what were the things that they focused on the most. And the candidate names or the labels applied to the candidates are clearly predominant there. But again, you dig into that and it makes you can make a whole lot of sense out of it. So the word frequency report is one approach. There are text-based reports. So if I go to, let's say, I can ask for a collection report. This will give me all of the clips and quotes and snapshots that I've gathered together in a particular collection. And Transana gives me a report that includes the location of each piece of data, the transcript, because this is mostly video data, that was used for the selections that I made, the coding that was applied to that for each one. You'll notice that each of these clipped links is a hyperlink. So if I am looking at this and I have a question about it, or I don't understand some aspect of why I coded it a particular way, I can click on that link. Transana loads that raw data in the underlying Atmos environment and allows me to watch that video. So you're always just a click away from your raw data. Yeah, Sarah, I can send out the recording link within a couple of hours when the the webinar ends. Sorry, we're running a little bit long today, but that's not uncommon for this webinar, to be honest.
No, it's great. Thank you very much. It's been really, really useful. Thanks a lot.
And so we see that Transana is showing us that information about all of the clips that we have gathered together. You can see here's an example of a screenshot that I took from the video that I marked up analytically in terms of what students understood in green, and evidence of something that showed that they didn't quite understand things as well as we might have thought, shown by these two red lines. And so that visual, and here's the one that I just created a few minutes ago that is showing up as well. And we get some summary information about that in terms of what coding is applied across this particular set of data that's gathered together. It gives a lovely little bar graph laying that all out as well. And again, I can do that report from data that I've gathered together of analytic bits from lots of different places. I can do that same report from the source data, which looks at that data from a very different direction. It's very similar reports asking very different analytic questions. In addition to those text-based reports, I can do a variety of visual reports, graphical reports. Here's a keyword map of some video game play. This video game play was very chaotic, moved very, very quickly. I was having a really hard time understanding it, but I did a bunch of coding on it. And then I organized my codes in a particular way. All of Transana's reports have a filter dialog that allows you to customize the report. You can specify which data to include or exclude, what codes to include or exclude, in what order, with what colors. And so this is a manipulation of that data that is designed specifically to answer a particular question that I had. In a way, I organized my data in a way to approach that question. And now with this report, you can see that the gameplay occurred in three quite distinct phases. That there's this first phase for the first 8 minutes, from minute 8 to about minute 13, there's something different. And then from minute 13 and a half till the end of the game, there was a third thing going on. And so being able to organize my data in this way allowed me to see those three phases. In addition, the length of each of these bars is something that is interpretable. Each of those bars represents a player life in this run around and shoot people game. And so I was able to explore the difference between a long life and a short life and see if I could figure out analytically what was going on with those differences. I could click each of these bars and Transana loaded the segment of that video into the underlying interface to allow me to watch one of these long lives, to allow me to watch one of these short lives, so that I could try and observe what was different about them and to see what made sense about all of that. I can also, because I have the ability to create these different views of the data, I can create named reports that actually answer different questions. So the report we've been looking at is about the structure of the gameplay, but I also have one that is specifically about the chat that occurred during gameplay. It's a very different question. You can see that my report looks very different as well, but I can, from looking at this diagram, tell the story of a particular aspect of the chat that these particular keywords were trying to capture. And so I'm able to query my data and organize my reports in a way that allow me to understand the data and tell the story that that needs to be told about what this data means and how it all comes together. So there are a host of different reports, text-based, graphically based, that look at data from different angles and in different ways that allow you to make sense out of all of that. There is also Transana's search engine that allows you to look at the coding that you've done, and the kinds of data objects you've got, and text that appears in different parts of the data, as well as where in your analysis it falls from a categorization standpoint. You can combine all of those elements together into searches that allow you to explore your data, make sense of your data. And when Transana gives you the results of a search, it returns quotes and clips and snapshots in collections, just like you're able to observe up in the collections part of the data, so that you can look at your data, make sense out of it. The difference is that collections are permanent, search results are temporary. Not every search is a winner, not every search leads to insight. Those searches that don't, you can drop, and you can manipulate it to explore the data and then drop the results. No harm, no foul. Where you do discover something interesting, you can convert that to a collection, which is a way of making it a permanent finding within Transana. So you can save what you have discovered in a variety of different ways in Transana. So that is probably more information than anyone can process in a given hour anyway. There's a ton more going on in Transana that I didn't have a chance to touch upon. So let me, in closing, point out that the Transana website is a really excellent way of gaining information about the program. There's all kinds of information on the website about different ways of understanding the program and different capabilities it has. The contact form on the website is the most efficient way of getting a hold of me. So please use the contact form to ask me questions. The contact form is nice because it asks, what operating system are you using? What version of Transana are you using? Which, if you don't give me that information through the contact form, is going to be my first response to you anyway, is to ask those questions, because it makes a difference. And so the contact form is a great way of getting in touch with me, to ask your questions and to get information about Transana. There's also a tutorial that is very extensive. The tutorial is actually considerably larger than the rest of the website all come together. And the tutorial walks you through all aspects, everything I've touched upon today and more. There's some introduction stuff. There's adding source data to your database. There's a section on transcription. There's getting ready to do analysis. There's making selections, which is the analytic process. There's manipulating selections, which is taking the data that you've identified as important and going on and doing more with that. There's finding meaning, which is really talking about reports and searches. And there's sort of miscellaneous stuff. Each of these blue things is a hyperlink. Most of them include video descriptions as well as text descriptions of what's going on. Huge amount of information in this tutorial, but it's also designed in a way that you can pick, if you're working with PDFs, you can easily find the PDF sections and learn about working with PDFs. If you're working without transcripts, there's that section. If you're working with multiple media files at once, there's that section. So you can pretty easily find what it is you're working on. Huge amount of information in that tutorial. It covers everything that I would talk about and much, much more here. So another question, will the recording of the webinar be made available? Yeah, I will send that link out. It takes a couple of hours usually for the video to process and for me to get it submitted to YouTube and get it ready. But I'll send that link out when it's available sometime this afternoon. And another question, can you share Transana databases and coding with other users? I'm going to work with another colleague, and it would be useful to share my analysis with her in order to enhance its reliability. Yes, you can. There are actually 3 different versions of Transana. There's a basic version that is designed for video analysis only, single video, single transcript, doesn't have text, doesn't have PDFs, doesn't have still images. It's really designed for people learning qualitative analysis or with relatively straightforward, simple media-based data sets. There's a professional version of Transana that's designed for single researcher use. that has all the bells and whistles, all the different features, everything I've shown you today, plus much more. And that that works on everything is contained on a single computer with that version. So you can take your database file, export it, share it with that and your media files with a colleague, and what they add to your analysis will be separate from what's on your computer, because they just have a copy of your data, and what they do to their copy doesn't influence your copy. Then there is the multi-user version of Transana, which is a system that is designed to allow a collaborative research team to all work together on the same data at the same time. As you can imagine, there's a little bit more technical work to get that set up and running to support a whole team. The team does not all have to be located together. I've done analyses where people on 3 different continents were working on the same data in a collaborative analysis, and it worked beautifully for that. And so the multi-user version is designed for collaboration, where whatever work you do is immediately available to your colleagues, whatever your colleagues do is immediately available to you. And so that's a different model of sharing your data. So Transana actually has 2 different models for sharing data with collaborators, depending on which version you have and what your analytic needs are. I have a question about accessing Transana and data remotely, the best way to go about this. When you say accessing it remotely, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. If you're using Transana multi-user, that's designed to allow people in different locations to access the same data at the same time, but there is some technological setup that one has to do to get that to work, that you're going to need to involve an IT department basically to get that up and running.
Yeah, sorry, can I jump in?
Yeah.
That was, yes, what I mean is occasionally I work from home, and now in the summer I'm going to be working from home. And I noticed that I just want to know if I remote access my work computer that has the software and the data, and I remotely access it, will the pathway break that I create for creating the transcription? Like, will I still be able to go back to my work office and have that transition smoothly? Sorry, a bit distracted.
That's okay. What you're going to find is that kind of distance connection really doesn't work that well with video data.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. I noticed
the bandwidth required for that remote access is a little bit beyond the capabilities of the modern internet. So what I would suggest in that case is to get an external hard drive, put your data files and your database on that external hard drive, and transport that back and forth between the 2 locations. Then you have a single unified data set on that external hard drive that you're accessing from either computer or you're working on it.
And so that will also then won't break the pathway. Like, there'll always be that link. It'll go from whatever computer I'm using straight to the hard drive, straight then following the pathway, whichever folder it's in. So that will be smooth, right?
Right. Okay. So there's a little trick to that, which I can show you. On Windows, under Options Program Settings, it's a little bit different on the Mac. You see this media library directory?
Okay.
That is a setting on each computer. So let's say your external hard drive comes up as the D drive when you're at home, but the N drive when you're at the office.
Yes.
Setting a different media library directory in each of those locations, you can configure Transana to always go to that external hard drive. And so that's what allows those links to continue to work.
Okay, perfect.
So the media library directory is really, really crucial to that. And the settings here are on a computer by computer basis. So you can have different computers have different sets of settings, but pointing to the same physical drive that you're moving from one computer to the other. And that's how you solve the problem that you're describing.
That's perfect. That is exactly what I was hoping to. Yes, great. Thank you very much.
And then you've got your video files local, so you're not running into bandwidth problems with the videos, which is the
exactly
other issue that you're going to run into.
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Perfect.
Okay, so, right, Transana website, the tutorial, I'm in the midst of revising the tutorial, getting it updated to 5.0, replacing some information on it that got a little bit stale. And so you'll see that in the top half, all of the links are clear. In the bottom half, a lot of the links have asterisks following them that indicate that I haven't quite revised that page yet. But I'm working on it. Takes a little bit of time. But the tutorial covers a lot of stuff, and I'm working on improving it slowly as I go. Okay, I have to leave for another meeting. Thanks for the information, and I look forward. Okay, good, cool. All right, I'm happy to stay and answer questions for as long as people have questions. And Debbie, we can get into some of the specifics of the issues that you're having as a part of that. What questions do people have about anything related to Transana, whether I've talked about it or not here, because there's a lot that the program can do that I don't have time to get into when I only have an hour and 15 minutes to talk about it. And I know I talk fast. There's a lot to cover. Thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it. You're welcome to hang out and ask questions as we go. And otherwise, thanks for coming, and I'll just keep working with people who do have questions. Okay. Any other questions before we start diving into Debbie's questions? Okay, Debbie, I think you're up.
Okay, so I transcribed, I did all that, I created collections, but it only had the data there. It didn't have the video clip. And so I was trying to create the video clip, but I think I know where the problem is. I think it's because I didn't put the time codes in. So that's not going to create the video clip, right?
If you don't put the time codes in, then Transana will pick your entire video for every single selection you make.
That's what it was doing. Okay, that's where I made the mistake. So the
Yep.
time codes are important.
When you make a selection, Transana looks for the time code before your selection, looks for the time code afterwards. And if you right click it, I'm just in an episode transcript right now. If I right click it.
Now I'm gonna go back to where we started, and now I'm going to flip it down.
And what it just played there is what it will play in the clip that you create from this particular selection. Without any time codes in, it's going to start at the beginning and play till the end every single time.
Yes, that's what it was doing. And so what my hesitation was with regarding those time codes is just when you get too many and they overlap, it doesn't seem, you know what I mean? That's what I was worried about. That's why I was hesitant to use them.
Transana allows you to have as many time codes as you need. Ultimately, for your analysis, you're going to need a lot, and there are times when they get very, very complicated. For example, I have video of the 2020 presidential debates, and there was so much interrupting and overtalk that there are portions of that where I have time codes almost every second or third word, because it was that complicated to transcribe in a way that I could follow and make sense of. And Transana, if you make a selection across time codes, that's not a problem. So if I make this selection, you see time code there, time code there, time code here.
Watch what happens. Okay. Now I'm gonna go back to where we started, and now I'm going to flip it down.
And I just right clicked it, and Transana can handle those embedded time codes, no problem at all. Like I say, it looks for the time code before your selection, it looks for the time code following your selection, and that's how it decides where that block is. If you have more time codes than that, that's not a problem. Now, the one rule that you need to pay attention to when creating time codes is that time codes do have to be in linear order. They have to be, each time code has to be later in time than the time code before it, and earlier in time than the time code after it. Because that moving cursor only makes sense if the time codes are linear. But your transcript is linear too, because your video is linear. So that's less of a restriction than it sounds like. And so as long as you do that, you're fine. And if you're out of that sequence, so let's go ahead and go into edit mode. So my cursor's right now, it's presented.
Watch what happens.
It's placed for this watch what happens. If I go to later in the transcript and I try and insert a time code, Transana gives me what's called a time code sequence error. I'm trying to insert the time code of 8.2 seconds between the time code of 17.8 and 19.5. Well, 8.2 doesn't fall between 17.8 and 19.5. So I can't put that time code in that position. That time code has to be here because this is the section where the video actually rests.
Got it. And then with the time codes I can put in and then later do the video clips?
Yes.
Okay. Got it.
And one of the advantages of using Speechmatics is with Speechmatics, here's the Speechmatics. You'll notice that all the Speechmatics transcript has time codes for every sentence. So as that data comes in from the Speechmatics servers, it tells me where it thinks the sentence stops or ends. So it doesn't always get those sentence breaks right. But every time it thinks there's a sentence, it puts in a time code at the beginning. So that gives you preliminary time codes as part of the preliminary transcription as well.
And I can remove those if I use Speechmatic. I can remove those time codes if
Yeah,
I don't want to use them.
You
Okay.
just delete them, yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay.
Oh, there's rarely a reason to remove a time code.
Yeah. Okay, and then my last question is in regards to exporting a video clip. I guess that would be in your website on how to export a video clip.
It's there somewhere, but I'll go ahead and show you anyway. Let's say I want to export this particular video clip. All I have to do is right click it and choose export clip video.
Okay. And that's it, huh? Okay. That's so easy.
What I find, if I know I'm going to be exporting a clip, I tend to give it a little bit of padding before and after, just because when I export a video clip, I'm generally going to edit it with a video editing tool into something, and having that little bit of padding is sometimes helpful. But other than that, yeah, it literally is that simple. That you right click your clip, you choose export clip video, and then it's just Transana's media conversion tool. You give it a file name, make sure you specify a name and a location where you can find it, and you hit convert, and it spits it out.
Thank you so much.
You're quite welcome. Okay, another question on the chat. Am I going to organize other webinars in the future? Absolutely. I tend to do fewer webinars in the summer just because webinar attendance goes down in the summer. So I will be posting a couple of more webinars before the end of the week. In the summertime, I tend just to do introductory webinars, although I'll probably do one more webinar focused specifically on the new features of 5.0. And then in the fall, you can look for, I do a webinar on collaborative analysis of video that specifically focuses on the multi-user version of Transana and what it takes to have a team working together. That topic is detailed enough that kind of gets its own webinar. And then I have an advanced techniques webinar where I talk about using multiple simultaneous media files or multiple simultaneous transcripts or some of the other advanced tools that Transana has for going beyond and doing more complicated kinds of analyses. There's also, I did a webinar for the Cactus Network on transcription as an analytic tool. And that webinar is actually in the tutorial. There's a link to types of transcripts, and there's actually a link to that hour-long webinar in that page on the tutorial. If you're interested in exploring way more than anybody ever wanted to know about different ways that one can transcribe to achieve different analytic results. There's sort of a 10-minute version of it and an hour-long version of it, both linked on that. That's not a webinar I do live more than maybe once a year or once every couple of years. But the other ones I do the advanced and the collaborative one, I do them once a semester in the fall and the spring. And then the intro one I do every 2 to 4 weeks around the clock, 4 weeks over the summer, about every 2 weeks during the academic year. And if you're on the mailing list, you'll get an email for every time a webinar approaches. I'm sorry that English is a bit of a challenge, particularly because I know I talk too fast during the webinars because I have too much to put forward. We do a couple of times a year. I have a colleague who provides an introductory webinar in French. I don't know if that helps you at all, but there is a French webinar that comes up every once in a while. I can also provide you with contact information if you'd like to get in touch with her. If you happen to be a French speaking person. But unfortunately, English is the only language that I'm able to present a webinar in. And if you have any particular questions that I could help answer, where maybe I talked too fast or you didn't quite understand what I was saying because of language issues, I'm happy to go over it a little more slowly now, if that would help. All right, if there are no more questions, thanks very much for coming to the webinar. And if you do come up with questions afterwards, by all means, use the contact form to send me your questions and I will answer them as quickly as I'm able to. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.